Good morning. Thanks for coming to this week's press availability for the Alaska Independent Democratic Coalition. I'm Representative Chris Tuck, and joined with me today from Anchorage is Representative Les Gara, and from Fairbanks, Representative Adam Wool. Alaska is blessed with abundance of natural resources and incredible talented people. We are Alaskan. We all love Alaska, but what makes this place so wonderful is its people. And as Alaskans, we all have the same wants and desires. We want to have decent jobs. We want to have adequate health care. We want to provide a good education for our children. And we want to retire comfortably so we can continue contributing to our communities. The Alaska Independent Democratic Coalition is making this session this year about Alaskans, to make sure that state funds create lasting opportunities and jobs, to continue working to invest in building Alaska and repairing our infrastructure, and to be fiscally conservative so we have the funds in the lean years to be able to provide for the future. But we can't cut deep enough, especially with this $4 billion budget gap, to solve the situation that we're in now. We do support a comprehensive plan, one that brings us all together and saying that we're all in this together. And if cuts go too deep, it will actually cost us thousands of public and private sector jobs and push us further into a deeper recession. We want to make Alaska known as a smart state, making smart decisions, smart development, smart education, and a bright future. And this session is the year and the time to do that, to make those smart decisions. And with that, serving on House Finance, I would like to turn it over to Representative Les Gara.
Thank you. We anticipate that we'll have conference committee soon, and the reason that's relevant is this. There have been a number of cuts that we've seen that our counterparts on the other side of the aisle have passed. Right now, there are cuts to people with disabilities. There are cuts to seniors. There are cuts that affect children, and there are cuts to the university. At some point, you need a state that is better than one that people want to move away from. And but right now, the formula is one where parents are wondering whether they want to raise their children here because they don't see a commitment to public education. The best indicator of whether or not you're going to keep talent in a state is whether the youth and students in the state attend university in the state. But this is yet another year of major cuts to the university under that budget. Those kinds of cuts have to be reversed. And how you can tell me that we need to cut services to people born with disabilities, it's an argument that just does not have logic to it. I believe in cutting waste. I voted for $700 million of cuts last year, but I don't believe in cutting things beyond waste that affect people with disabilities, the opportunity for children in school, the ability for us to have a decent university in the state. One of the main ways we can do that is to have a balanced fiscal plan, but it's not a balanced fiscal plan if it's a privileged person's fiscal plan. It's very easy for the folks who are walking the halls in this legislature who make a lot of money, who dress very well, who are able to hire lobbyists to say, just cut the dividend. They don't need the dividend. That's not a comprehensive plan. That's a privileged person's plan. We have to look at other things as well. And until those things are looked at, it's going to be very hard for me to consider just doing the things the wealthiest people in the state of Alaska want. One of those things is to fix an oil tax system that doesn't charge any oil production tax revenue, gets no oil production taxes for any field after 2002 and any future field. Those fields pay no money in production taxes all the way up to oil prices of $73 a barrel. And the biggest fields pay a tiny 4% tax all the way up to $76 a barrel. So oil prices have to nearly double before we start getting any real oil tax, production tax revenue. That's a pathway to poverty. That needs to be fixed as part of a fiscal plan. And there are very easy fixes. You could very easily have that 4% tax move up slowly as we get to prices where oil companies are profitable again. Not when they're not profitable, but when prices get higher in the $50, $60, $70 a barrel range. They should chip in just like they are sitting here telling everybody else that only poor people should chip in. It's really very disappointing to have every single industry group coming to the state, almost every single one, and say, you know how you solve the fiscal plan? A lot of these corporate representatives are saying, by making somebody else pay. And when the most privileged people in the state of Alaska say a fiscal plan should just be based on making somebody else pay, you've got a problem. So we're willing to work on something comprehensive. We always have been. But it also means that the biggest donors, those with the biggest lobbyists, also have to come to the table. With that, I'm going to turn it back over to Representative Tuck.
Okay, and then from Fairbanks, Alaska, also serving on House Health and Social Services, Representative Adam Wool.
Thanks, Chris. Well, as many of you heard, there's some good news coming to the state and coming to Fairbanks, and that's the announcement that the F-35 squadrons will be stationed at Eielson Air Force Base, and that's great news for our community and for our state. Brings hundreds of millions of dollars, thousands of jobs, a lot of construction, a lot of development, a lot of people coming to Fairbanks, so that's good. This sort of counters some of the recent news that we've had about the university system, which is a big economic driver and a big part of our community, and that's the hundreds of jobs that's potentially going to be cut from the university this year, in addition to hundreds of jobs that have been lost in the years past, with tens of millions of dollars that have been cut. So we welcome the good news, but we want to turn the tide on the bad news and try to reverse some of that, because the House passed a $50 million cut to the university this recently, and we want to try to reverse that. That's unacceptable. University is a big driver for the community, for the state. It's a growth industry right now. We have other industries that are in the decline. Oil is in decline right now. It's not bringing any revenue, if any at all, and the university is a growing industry. We have research. We have Arctic Science Summit Week a couple weeks ago in Fairbanks, and this is the industry that we should be investing in and attracting people to Alaska, students, faculty. This is the area that we should be growing and not cutting. So we welcome the F-35 news, and we want to improve the situation for the university. Thanks.
Okay, and we'll open up for questions. Please state your name and your affiliation. Yes.
James Brooks from the Juneau Empire. I imagine there's as many answers to this question as there are people in the legislature, but what would it take to get you to vote for a 3/4 draw on the CBR?
Whatever.
Okay. What we need is we need a fiscal plan. We need to make decisions this year so that we set the foundations and the framework for the future years. And so we don't have anything set in stone, must-haves. But one thing is very clear is that we want to get what we can from our resources first before we start dipping into the permanent fund. And so we're going to do what we can to work on all those. Right now we have House Bill 247 that's in House Finance right now being heard. And we have Paul Seaton's bill going to be heard on Thursday. So we're just going to see how things come together. One thing that is for sure is that we do want to continue investing in early education, public education, and our university system. These are some of the economic drivers that help us solve the problems and actually build new industries and create new jobs for the future. So we don't want to stop our investment for the future generations.
You want to follow up, James?
No.
Liz Raines with KTVA. The minority has really pushed for a fiscal plan, seemed in alignment with the governor on that. We heard yesterday from the Senate majority that for some of them, it's not necessarily a must-have to have any kind of a long-term plan to utilize the permanent funds earnings. We've also heard that they're not interested in an income tax from several. What's your reaction to that? We're starting to hear talk now of simply having a majority vote to draw from the earnings this year to pay for government.
Well, that's a short-sighted, weak proposal coming from the Senate. I served on the Fiscal Policy Planning Committee with Senator McKinnon. We went over this stuff years ago. We understand the situation that we're in. She understands the situation we're in right now. And we can't just rely on oil prices going up. We need to be able to look at the new revenues this year to be able to come up with a comprehensive package. And when we talk about comprehensive package, we agree with the governor on his proposal of all of it being included. But as far as the elements and as far as the details of what he has, it needs to be worked on quite a bit. So there's a lot of work to do that we still need to do, and we're hoping that the Senate will get on board with us.
I just want to say it's been heard. People in the Senate have said things like, "Oh, we're not in the taxing business." I'm not quite sure what that means, but we're in the governing business, but we're not in the kicking the can business. So by just taking our earnings reserve, that's really kicking the can, and I think there's a lot more work to be done before we're going to do that. That's for sure.
And that's just simply a rate of the permanent fund, and we don't want to do a rate in the permanent fund. If anything, we're going to structure the permanent fund so that we have maximize the potential of that fund to protect and continue having dividends for future generations. Yes. You got a mic there.
Well, what's getting lost in all this is there are two things that you have to do to make sure that this state doesn't go into recession. One is that we have to come together across party lines and get out of our ideological boxes and put together a plan. And that means that you don't always have to do everything the oil industry tells you to do. That's not a plan. And it's not a plan just to go after the permanent fund dividend or the permanent fund. That's not a plan. That's a privileged person's plan. But the other part of it is you have to listen to your best and brightest. And the university has come out and said every $100 million of additional cuts at this point, we've cut $700 million last year, which I voted for, but now every $100 million of additional cuts is an additional loss of 1,250 to 1,500 jobs in an economy that is teetering on recession. And so if what you want to do is create a recession, all you do is keep cutting and cutting and cutting beyond government waste. We believe in cutting government waste. The governor proposed about $100 million of cuts. That made sense. We don't have all the money in the world. But now we're talking about $300 million worth of cuts. That's an extra 2,500 jobs, or maybe 3,000 jobs that we lose. People who won't go to the grocery store, people who won't be able to buy things, people who won't be able to buy houses. That's a recipe for a recession. We have to fix both of those things. Just cutting number one, we know, doesn't solve the deficit. You know, it's not really something you can brag about to say instead of cutting $100 million, you cut $300 million, so your deficit is not $4.4 billion, it's $4.25 billion. Is that something you're going to walk out of this building and celebrate, that you now have a $4.25 billion deficit? You've got to do better, and you've got to not create a recession.
Just a quick follow-up. So we also saw a bill introduced yesterday, HB 376. Representative Olson's office says it's a sort of a fallback in case those other permanent fund plan bills don't go through, a 35% tax on the PFD. How do you respond to that proposal? And just in response to what you said, Representative Tuck, about how it's going to take time to work through some of these details of the governor's fiscal plan, can we go ahead and say now that we're going to have a special session?
I still believe that we can get done in 90 days. We got 12 days coming up. It's amazing how much work can get done once people come together. And that's what we need to have going on right now, is people need to come together and really work out the details of these things. I know Finance Committee is going to be going probably two times a day, every day from here to the end. And so now that things are getting accelerated, now there's a drive, now that people want to get out of town, hopefully we'll have a meeting of the minds and be able to do this. We just got to, right now the Senate is the one that's holding things back as far as having these talks and having these the dialogue. And we're not putting our feet in the ground saying that we have to have this or we have to have that, but we have that going on in the Senate. They're saying that, you know, the most that we can do is maybe a permanent fund rate. That's just simply unacceptable.
Matt Hers with Alaska Dispatch News. Do you guys see, it seems like there are all these bills that are in play, a lot of bills in the House Finance Committee. There's an income tax, the governor's income tax bill, Paul Seaton's income tax permanent fund legislation. The Senate, is hearing SB 114 and SB 128, which is Senator McGuire's bill, and the governor's permanent fund bill. Is there anything that sort of needs to be in place for these final negotiations that's not currently in place, or is kind of all the pieces of the puzzle are there, and it's just a question of putting them in a way that everyone can look at the puzzle and say that they like it, to sort of stretch that metaphor pretty far?
Well, if we want Alaskans to feel confident in the decisions that we make right here, it's really important that we don't burden one group of people over another. So I think it is a comprehensive package that needs to happen, with emphasis in certain areas. Here we are. The easiest thing to do is go after the permanent fund. That's a big pot of money there. It's easy to get after. Some of the tough things to do is looking at oil taxes again. And so we're simply saying that you're not going to be able to do the permanent fund without looking at our other resources and leveraging to do something better in those areas. So yeah, I mean, it's one of those things where It's going to be give and take on both sides. It's going to be meeting of the minds, and it's going to look at how each puzzle fits together to where a working family of 4 isn't burdened more than someone else.
I guess I just want to ask, I mean, are there any pieces to that sort of final plan that you guys see as must-haves that aren't sort of in the finance committee or sort of close to a place where they can be put into that adjournment package?
Right there, you go, Mike.
We all know it's going to take a mix of things. We all know that that means that Republicans and Democrats have to sit down together. I think there are a number of folks who I think could work together and put together a bipartisan fiscal plan across party lines. Right now, every time we count, we can easily get to almost 18 or 19 and 8 or 9 on both sides, and we have to get to 21 and 11. And I can say I'm willing to work across party lines to put something together, even if it means I've got to vote for something that I don't love. I would think that's probably true of the gentleman standing next to me. But at some point, that means that both sides have to come together. It's a little concerning that we're so late in the special session, but I will say that there are a number of Republicans and Democrats who have said, let's work together and solve this. It hasn't yet gelled into a majority of people, and I hope it does.
To use your puzzle piece analogy, Nat, I think there's a bunch of pieces on the table, and there may be 5 or 6 or 7, and at the end of the day, maybe it'll be 5, and maybe some of those pieces have to be trimmed to fit together. They're not all perfect pieces that just fit nicely. You might have to get your jackknife out and kind of trim some pieces and make them fit. And maybe one piece won't be on there at the end of the day. But basically, there's a bunch of pieces that we have to arrange, and that's going to take sitting down, a bunch of us in a room, and hashing it out. And like doing your final paper for school, you might wait till the last day or two to work on it, to really cram it through and pull an all-nighter. And that's okay. But something has to come out of this.
So I just wanted to ask one more quick question, which was, when you guys are saying the Senate that's the body that's holding things up, I mean, are you judging that, is that from their public statements? Is that from you guys have approached them to try to negotiate and they're just shutting the door? Or, can you describe sort of what specifically is the problem there?
It's primarily the public statements. It's primarily what it is. And so we're here today publicly saying that, we understand there's a group of people in this building that support the oil industry and hold them dear to their hearts. There's another group of us over here that support protecting the permanent fund dividend, because that's dear to our hearts. And so it has to be a coming together on figuring out how, as Representative Wolf pointed together, we're going to carve these pieces and put them together. And there's a big, huge contingency in the middle. The fishing industry says, hey, we want to be involved, yes. We will pay our part, but we don't want to be burdened with the whole thing. And that's what we got to look at, is making sure that one group of people isn't burdened more than the other group of people.
Can I say one thing?
Yes, go ahead.
I just don't want anybody to interpret, make a great story about how much folks don't like each other. I get along well with Senator Kelly. I get along with the House Finance co-chairs. We get along. We can make this work. And our pitch is, look, we're people who get along. We're going to have to do things maybe that one side doesn't want or the other side doesn't want. But let's sit down. In my view, if I were governor, I would trap about 10 of us inside of his office for a week until they go back and forth and back and forth and back and forth and come out with something. And I don't know what that would look like. But I hope it would say we can't live off 0 production tax oil fields anymore. That's got to change. We could raise an extra $500 million at $50, $60, $70 a barrel by moving that minimum tax floor up and eliminating the exemption that lets some of those oil fields pay no tax. In Cook Inlet, oil pays no production tax. In Cook Inlet, gas pays no production tax. And on the North Slope, a lot of oil fields pay no production tax. That's not a way to move the state forward. That's a pathway to poverty.
And in these days, we are going to come together. I just hope that as we come together, people keep an open mind. We're keeping an open mind. We don't have a list of must-haves, but one thing I think is very clear is the governor wants us to have this fiscal situation fixed this year, and we're supportive of that. And so, so how that all comes together is still yet to be determined. But regarding to the Senate, we also have the PERS and the TERS bill and the performance scholarship bills that came through. And those are weak solutions. Those aren't really looking at everything comprehensively. And that is really pushing the burden onto local communities, local schools, and really local taxpayers. And so when we look at the $50 increase to the student-based allocation, and then that teacher retirement system bill coming through, it's going to pull money out of the classroom, and that's simply unacceptable to us.
And you also had $100 million unallocated cuts come out of their budget, which is a passing of the buck. I mean, it's not really doing their job.
So, Andrew Pitchman, Alaska Public Radio Network. The governor's initial budget balanced the budget in 2 years. I mean, it took 2 years to end pulling out of the reserves. So, do you see that time frame as a necessary element of a comprehensive plan?
I think so. I think that, but the decisions need to be made this year. But how it gets implemented, when it gets implemented, that can take over a period of time. But we have financial institutions rating our credit rating here in the state of Alaska, and they want to see decisions happen this year. And things are going to go up for us if we don't make those decisions this year. Our rating is going to be hugely affected by that, which is going to make it very difficult for us next year in solving this problem. And we need to be able to have a good bond rating. We need to continue having capital projects, and we don't want to put ourselves in a situation where we're crippling our economy and crippling our ability to get out of the recession next year. Yes, go ahead, Les.
There's one thing that is really striking. There's only one group of entities in the state that's getting more money than our law says they should get. That's the oil industry. Our law has a formula that says how much we're supposed to pay out in tax credits, and that limit is about $72 million this year. Yet the oil industry has marched in, company after company, saying they want all $800 million. They want about $700 million more than the law provides for. At the same time, a budget that we opposed gives seniors less money than the statutes say. The senior benefits program promises an amount of money, and now that's been eliminated for a whole group of people. Our education bill promised much more money than is being provided by this legislature so far. And schools now, are, compared to 2 years ago, are getting less money than they were 2 years ago. At some point, when you're telling children they get less than the law provides for, which I don't agree with, and telling seniors they get less money than the law provides for, which I don't agree with, but that oil companies should get $700 million more than the law provides for, just an extra appropriation above what the law provides for. There's just one group in this building that's being treated very specially. That's wrong. And of course they have the loudest voices. And it does get very old to see the best dressed people with the highest salaries walk into this building saying, we don't want to be part of a fiscal plan. That doesn't work.
There's a sentence you hear a lot, which is, we don't have the money. We don't have the money. I was on a conference call recently, and someone asked about the UAF engineering building. And they said, do you foresee funding for the unfinished UAF engineering building? And the answer was, sorry, we don't have the money. But yet a bill goes through House Resources asking for $500 million in tax credit cuts, which is our third largest expenditure as a state after health and social services and education becomes tax credits. And when they say, we want to cut 500, they say, oh, no, let's cut 50. So suddenly there is money for that. There's $450 million for that. But when you want to finish a UF engineering building, there's not enough money, and that's the wrong priority.
Yeah, it doesn't make sense that, last year we went through a session that virtually held the oil industry harmless. And now we're saying, no, we're going to keep them protected again this year, but we're going to cut education. I mean, where's the values in that? And you look at, I understand that people, the industry's coming to us and saying, hey, we can't survive without this stuff. Well, it depends on our bottom line. It depends on our profit. Well, we got to depend on future generations also, and that's where public education is very important. From pre-K, from early education, all the way up to the university system.
We can do things in a way that keeps the oil industry profitable. We have to do that. But keeping them profitable is different than giving away the farm. And giving away the farm is not the right way to go.
Liz Raines with KTVA again. I think my question got buried about the PFD tax bill. Is there a way to work with that bill? Perhaps, make it progressive so that those with lesser income pay less of a tax. It seems quite much simpler than some of the PFD plans we've seen so far.
The Olson plan you're talking about?
375.
I think it's another kick the can bill. I mean, it's a quick grab of money out of the permanent fund that doesn't really have any long-term sustainability. It's a short-term fix, and I think it's the wrong way to go.
Here's one piece of math, and I'll try and make this as understandable as possible. By giving oil companies $700 million more than we get back in production taxes, roughly $500 to $700 million more than we get back in production taxes. That's the equivalent of cutting the dividend $600, $700, $800. Right? If the insistence is that the oil industry has to get everything that they want, and we lose out on $600, $700, $800 million, that's about half the dividend. So the oil industry is asking for about half the dividend. That's not a plan.
Yes.
Hi, Rasha McChesney with the Associated Press. I'm just wondering where you are on the status of your budget negotiations and if you're having productive conversations, because I'm hearing a lot of what needs to happen, but not a lot of what's working so far. Or can you just give me an idea of if you're still having productive discussions?
Yes, we are, and then I'm going to have a discussion starting up with the Senate tomorrow. And but no, we have right now. It's just looking at what our opportunities are. We have 40 members in the House that needs to come together. So it's basically trying to figure out where everybody's at and where we can find common ground, so that we can come to solutions this year. So we're still in those early stages. We do have 2 weeks left of session. And you'd be surprised. Things do come together in the end very quickly, especially if we're going to have to be moving out of this building with the construction projects coming on. So I think that my talks tomorrow with President Meyer, I hope will go really well, and that he can be convinced that, yes, we can. There's opportunities for solving a lot of this year, and we can make it happen, and there's a will to do that.
I'm just going to follow up on that. I mean, is there an actual structure that you guys are trying to set up that is going to make those negotiations go differently or better than they did last year?
Well, that's a good question, because we have tried to set up a different situation. One of them is having a Ways and Means Committee. We have a resolution introduced in the House and the Senate to look at things comprehensively, look at things from a higher viewpoint to see how it fits together. Because one of our concerns is when you look at everything compartmentalized or by itself just through the normal committee process, it's hard for people to see the entire picture and see how it fits. And that's where negotiations comes in. That's where getting leadership together so we can discuss this stuff to make that stuff happen. And another thing that we proposed was a caucus of the whole, getting rid of the majority status as far as getting the budget figured out so we can all get in a room and really pull together on this stuff and to build relationships along the way. So yes, and you'll see that probably, every end of session, you'll see uniform rules, suspension of uniform rules on this or uniform rules on that as things start blending.
I guess I'm just wondering specifically to the end of this session. We definitely heard a lot about those ideas at the beginning of the session, but now you're kind of at 12 days left, and it seems like you're in the same spot as you were last year.
Yeah. Well, hopefully what happened last year won't be repeated, and that it won't take 53 days. So maybe the lesson learned from last year was let's start working together sooner and not try to drag it out and use some kind of delay tactic or maybe just wait it out. I think people will come together and realize that we mean business and we mean business now. So there's no advantage to waiting.
Right now, it really is up to the Republican majority to decide whether or not they want to work across party lines. They have the numbers. And so we've offered to work across party lines. I know a number of Republicans want to work across party lines. We have to get to that critical mass where enough people want to work across party lines. I will always do that. We will always do that. But yeah, the discussions are not where I wish they were at this point. We only have a certain number of members in our caucus. We have to rely on a majority of people to say, let's work across party lines. Last year, if you remember, it wasn't like people were holding their breath and not talking to each other. Last year, if you remember, there were some members on the other side of the aisle who were trying to get around working across party lines by using the permanent fund and then putting that money into the principal of the permanent fund, and that would have damaged the dividend probably. But if you remember, that was the refrain for about 6 weeks, which is, we don't have to work with you. We've got this permanent fund plan. We'll just spend a bunch of the permanent fund, stick it inside the principal, and we won't need to work across party lines. I think most members have decided that's not the way to go, but we need a majority of people to say, let's work across party lines. I think we're very close to that. But yeah, I wish we were further along. We can't demand that. We can only ask that.
And you even hear the House majority, you hear Speaker Chenault saying, we need to have revenues this year. He said it publicly many times. And so it's really trying to figure out if we can get the Senate to agree to that and then all come together and make it happen. Okay, that's a half hour. Thank you for being here, and we look forward to seeing you guys next week.